So, this is going to be a bit of an odd one, but some people may know exactly the physics I'm trying to talk about, but I don't, because I've never taken any courses, and I've certainly never been to college to describe their lingo and their words for this physics phenomenon that I'm about to tell you, that I know for a fact happens to work. I can just sort of see it in my head. I'm kind of like that. This is how I learn things, and then it gets later confirmed. Oh, that's the word. That's why constructive and destructive interference instead of interactive forces is a thing. It's like interactive. Well, yeah, no, they're interactive forces. Why wouldn't they be? They're interacting. Interactive forces. So describing entropy. No, you're not. You fucking idiot. Entropy is just what fucking drives it away from the very forces that cause them to attract in the first place. This is more of a quantum vacuum pressure energy more than anything else. That's where my mind goes. Oh, that's right. We're going to Flat Top Mountain today. What am I doing? All over the place. Okay. Alright. So, electrostatic is a weird thing, and they're used for headphones. And it's just a static charge with a specific material in between that makes it attracted or repulsed, depending on the positive or negative charge, ground, or whatever that happens to be there. Which is effectively like a railgun technology, if you don't know. It's effectively what they use for railguns. Kill guns are more electromagnetic, repulsive engines. But they are linear accelerators versus circular accelerators. That's all that is. So that's what I tend to view them as anyways. They just do it really, really well for certain materials, and outside of those materials, they don't do shit at all. Surprise, surprise, you know what I mean? Except not really. I'm going to move on. So aluminum does not matter. Eddy currents are not what I'm talking about. That's resistive for motion, which resistive is not really as big of a deal as you would think. It comes down to this. So, anyways, if anything, they're more beneficial for recapturing, which is a part of the aluminum that's in my design. So, if you take an eddy current, then have that current dump itself into a direction, kind of like an axle. Imagine it like a T-joint axle, differential in the rear. Well, it tends to want to bloom. Well, if you control its bloom, and you basically couple the one side of the axle to the other side, the direction that you want it to actually travel to, then you tend to get the full output, minus some parasitic loss and friction and all the rest of that, to be able to outright increase the total and the strength of that given spin from the drive shaft. Now, cool stuff, but where does that leave us? Well, an eddy current, when it dumps into something with an electrostatic attractive force near it, happens to be suddenly a lot more resistive to the current traveling backwards. It's like a valve. And as a result, you're able to increase a large amount for the electromagnetic fields, potential spiking electromagnetic fields, with a given material that allows for a kinetic push, so to speak. So let's put it this way. Put a material, let's say it was some fairly bog standard styles of grid-like layered copper and ceramic in between. Kind of like what they do for insulators around for spark plugs. Alright, well, you do that, and you happen to have, instead, with the, the aluminum on one side, you happen to have a, let's see here, oscillating effect inside of that. So you need it to be able to vibrate and have it follow the curved trajectory, like the gyroscope. See, it's like, well, there's a gyroscope. It's kind of like this gravitational field, and all of them are kind of continuing on the axis of it, but then they get sucked back with gravitational force, this mass constant. And it's like, right, yes, no, right. Well, what if you just decided to make it really hard to go that way and much harder? You mean electrostatic nuclear forces? Oh, yes, no, if only that were really possible, though. Because eventually the material breaks. Yes. What if instead of doing this, I just made it oscillate the right way, and I created a resonance frequency in the material that happens to travel in a curve-like fashion for the majority of the material. And the material where it's bouncing off of is actually a resonance frequency reflector. Now, let's say in that ceramic I happen to put the right kind of, let's say it was a fluid. It's not a fluid. Let's say it was a fluid. I mean, everything's kind of a fluid, just different time scales. You think about it. Entropy. Hey, I'm ripping you apart. Hey, come over here. I am attracted to you. Gravity, nukes, and all the rest with statics. Look at my charges over here. Oh yeah, baby, don't you want them? You know, that kind of thing. Anyways, this is a fluid that is not going to be pumped around. It's very static. It's not going to be anything but a dampener. Inertial dampeners activating. That's right. It's a non-Newtonian, but definitely a Newtonian fluid that both compresses and uncompresses. Inertial dampening is stabilization. But here's the best part. Upon compression, I create lenses in the oscillation and the rotational effects of the inertial dampening. So, if you happen to do that the correct way, which is always finicky little bullshit to model on fucking CADs and stuff, do a bunch of fluid dynamic works and all this other stuff. Get out the supercomputer, boys and girls. We've got shit to do. Nick, get fucked. Anyways, I'm going to talk about this because it's like, well, if I use the correct light, and I mean the correct light, with the correct fluid. So fluid is not all equal. You can't just use water. You can't just use any non-Newtonian fluid depending on what the oscillation effect is doing and how it happens to stiffen the fluid and create a much greater degree of resistance to compression once it's oscillating. Alright, which maybe some of you don't know about this, but take a rod of copper, start bouncing it on its ends, dun, 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 with the right resonant frequency. Alright, what you'll notice is if you try and hit it just in the right way, it actually resists compressive forces during that hit. When you hit it with a hammer and you're bouncing it the right way, you try and hit it, and it actually springs back, doesn't have a dent, doesn't have anything anymore. And that's because it combined the kinetic and momentum forces in that travel of direction against your hammer, but also stiffened its relative position of its crystalline structure for the given copper to be that much more like steel in a moment, a singular moment. Of course, it's not really aligning crystals. It's just making a bunch of waves propagate and effectively have a much stiffer reaction as it travels that wave from your hammer blow down through the material. in such a way that it acts like one ginormous, huge, bigger surface area that you're hitting, much heavier rod of copper, which is all it's really doing. It just supports it with the waves, the frequency inside. Now, these are all very delicate little things, so you have to get it just right to get the effect. And yet, when you do it right, that's exactly what you'll get consistently every single time. We happen to use it in watches and springs of all things to tell time pretty often, especially with piezoelectrics. We're at the right resonance frequency of a piezoelectric, and we increase its energy output dramatically. This is why it's used for certain very small, high energy demand, intensive applications that happen to have refrigerant cooling, like hyperspace pirate, suggested for certain small little electronic goggles that need to maintain, or laser optics or some shit, their thermal stability in high temperature environments. Turns out the effect was already noticed with these fluids. Even though they are much less pressurized, when you oscillate them correctly, they become much more like a rod that is higher in terms of pressure, and then becomes more efficient, by far, at being able to cool and take heat from certain areas for a given amount of electricity. And you put a little piezoelectrics there, and the right little substrate material. Next thing you know, you get a vastly increased amount of electricity gained from the cooling effect that you have to do from the surrounding material around it. And heat, as you cool one side and you heat it up in another, you get a thermal piezoelectric style of generation. It also happens to dampen significantly, because it takes energy to make that electricity and convert it with the right geometric patterns and shapes and the substrate material to ultimately move it and make sure the heat is transferred. So it becomes more efficient at being able to oscillate itself throughout the entire system without being a big constantly going on. So there's that. Now, I'm going to take a look at that whole thing that you probably thought was insane and stupid, and everything you said is stupid and wrong about my fluid that's non-Newtonian and Newtonian, depending on your relative perspective of the oscillations and the curvature of the rotating accelerator that is the electric motor that we're talking about. Makes it far more likely to be more efficient, but this is where the laser, which isn't really laser, it's light. So it's like, you need a laser. It's specifically a light. No, it's pulsing lights. You need specifically a pulsing light. Happens to drain. That's the resistance. If you don't know, that's the analogy of the axle, the differential axle in the rear, coupling it to the one direction. As you use the resistive conversion forces with the right material for the eddy currents here, from static from one side to directional forces on another, you happen to create a significant degree of repulsion, to a degree, from these copper. Let's say it was copper. It's not copper. I don't use copper. I use compound. In my mind, imagination stuff. I'm really good at this. I don't have CAD. I don't have to do anything like that. I'm just really smart. Not like others. Which is weird to say, but it's true. That's how I do this. So, anyways, I use a compound that I would love to tell you, but they'll go like, it's an impossible compound of a bunch of materials that will never go together. And I'm like, well, whatever. Float your boat. I'll figure it out one day. Anyways, The fluid becomes a stiff rod, becomes a lens, becomes a mirror that's very, very good. You pulse the lights the right way, you create a oscillating impact acoustic hammer. As the heat makes a different spring level occur on one side versus the other, and it hits it every single time. Wham! Many billions and trillions of times a second. And that's just pulsing it, utilizing the right photonic release from a given material, which LEDs is what they'll probably say. They're not powerful enough. They're shitty in terms of actual light output for their energy. I tend to never go with them because I want heat. I want alignment. I want a very specific light very quickly. It just needs to be a light bulb, though. And the right reflective material. You get a resonance chamber. It's kind of like a laser. Yeah, but I'm not lasering it. See, it's not actually coherented. It's very disorganized, is a way to put it. Instead of lamineared and coherented, it is now the opposite. It's more of a big, bunging, pulsing mass of light that dumps itself into kinetic force as it bunches up and then flings this compressible fluid forward as it changes its direction, then cools off, goes one way versus the other. Of course, the surrounding material is going to use that heat as well, because good old piezoelectrics are here to the rescue, as they will dump that electricity back into the directional alignment wires in the ceramic. So the wires create, if you do it right and you coil them correctly, means you create a pulsing force, like alignment. So they pulse very consistently, not like an oscillation, more like a resonance, or electromagnetics. Dun 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 dun. Kind of like a spike wave. You have this one, and then this one in front of it, and this one in front of it, and this one in front of it. Because they're shorter distance, they'll all arrive at the same time. But what it does, for me, is it creates field effects for the next one, after the first one, because there's still electromagnetic field that lingers as it travels. And as you move through it, that electromagnetic field that's lingering here is traveling forward in a rotational accelerated manner. It happens to capture a degree of that field into the next one, into the next one, into the next one, into the next one, and into the next one. Now, this creates a greater and greater degree of increased pole alignment. This is actually what they use as a resonance oscillator pole aligner for certain given flux materials they want to make occur. These are the secret sauces to making magnets. It's a pulsing electromagnetic field that is very specifically done. They usually use coils, but they're not very good for certain types of applications that need a more spiked given magnet. So that way the sides of the fields are much shorter and smaller than the elongated ones in the middle. So that's how they managed to make those. I came upon it by just imagining it, and I had to work out step by step for every single given physics that I knew that should be going on for electrostatic, nuclear, electromagnetic, and charge, which electrostatic is different, but that's a thermal / combination with electromagnetic, depending on what's going on with the size and area that we're talking about for a given field arrangement with the right spin and pole alignment. is exactly what I've been trying to talk about, which is the electrostatic kinetic amplification, which is really momentum amplification because it happens to align it in the curvature, and it dumps kinetic into a quadrupling force with the pole and static alignment of the movement, lamineering and coherenting all of the given particles and atoms in the same direction. But the spin is still the same, except it spins a little faster, and then it slows down because that's heat. That's its version of heat. As it all travels one direction, heat is still conserved. If you don't know, it's like a bullet. I was describing earlier before I started recording. A bullet pretty much travels the same all one direction. There's friction, vibrates on the outer edges and eventually gets inwards, but that's a chaotic kinetic movement. It's not very statically coherented or lamineared, and so it looks very, very warm, but when you align it in the same direction and it travels that direction, from our perspective, relative, it looks colder because there's less heat escaping as kinetic in a direction opposite to the direction it's traveling. That is why the fields that it happens to rotate through are there, and they're so damn important. Not just the oscillation, but those fields, those electromagnetic fields, mean they spin. They capture that energy into spin, and then they slowly slow down. But in how they slow down, because of the oscillation that is currently going on in the already there kinetic, it adds that spin back to kinetic, same direction. It takes a while, but it'll do it. A while being in the super small Planck's seconds. Typically we're in the order of a few hundred, maybe a few thousand at most, depending on the material. So everything happens really fast, But they're also really close together, so that's another reason why they're so prevalent and moving quickly to do this. But it creates an oscillation pressure wave that it bounds in. As it spins, it expands, and then it contracts. Conservation momentum. And so as it contracts, and it loses its spin, it then has to dump that conservation momentum into something. Well, there's an oscillation, so it happens to travel with the frequency of the pressure wave in the given material and happens to bounce forward effectively off the person behind it, like a Newton's cradle. Equal and opposite forces. Yay, math. Still working, Newton. Nice. Good dude, that guy. Too bad. He could have gotten so much pussy. Fuck you, Christians. Anyways, that is why it's an electrostatic kinetic amplifier. It all depends on the material you use. The capturing is you dump an attractive force into the eddy current, which isn't really very pronounced, if I'm going to be honest. It's the attractive ground force that then dumps it into this, which aluminum will produce a resistive force. It's like a very heavy material behind to all the given one-directional kinetic alignment, oscillation, resonant frequency pieces going on here. So when you do it correctly, it happens to all kind of travel almost completely together at once. Of course, there's time here, and it takes time to travel through materials, the given interactive interference forces that are going on, and the wave frequencies they're in, as there's no quantum superpositioning or entanglement here, just a whole lot of physics, which is the big good part for what it's worth. But what it does, the best part, is that it transfers a solid 98% of its given electrostatic attractive force to a kinetic impact wrench style hammer blow at the very edges throughout the entire radial or axial style material and geometric shape of your accelerator electric motor here that's going on. Which, again, words, they're all very thesaurus-y, similar stuff. Not really much difference there, you know what I mean? So, anyways, but I call it momentum is because, well, technically speaking, I converted a degree of momentum into heat, spin specifically, and it amplifies that into a kinetic. Now, because spin happens to be a big deal, as we use it as a resistive force, and when it becomes resistive, it's more resistive, it feels like it's heavier. As a result of it feeling like it's heavier, it becomes like it is more momentous, momenta, initial, whatever you want to call it. They're all a bunch of the same words to me. Very similar, at least. All very boring after a certain point. But all it means is it ends up acting like a spinning ball. You know, you used to get at Sharper Image, they had these little balls that would spin really, really fast, and you try and lift it up, and it's like, I've got more weight. I'm lifting 5 pounds. It's not. It's not, but it's a gyroscopic effect. Makes it feel like it's 5 pounds, but whatever. Sure thing. But as a result, it's, to our purposes, a degree of momentum increase. That drains itself into kinetic, because those little suckers can spin really, 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 really fast, and they drain really, really fast. You can build it up more and more and more, faster it spins, until you eventually get a very much increased hammer blow efficiency. As it gets more and more kinetic hit every single time, it is aligning itself in the same direction more and more every time, looking for all intents and purposes as if it is a coil railgun electrostatic kinetic amplification motor that happens to be spinning way, way too fast for the degree of electricity that you put in. Of course, it's a flywheel battery in a lot of ways because it's spinning. And it's using the material to spin a lot of these atoms all together at once, even the other little components inside for the protons and neutrons. I don't really know how the neutrons, I think they're like gears in a planetary gear set. It's a very steep hill, goddamn. Where it happens to be spinning the entire thing together in the same axis in rotation. If it wasn't for the oscillation constantly pushing it back down, well, it happens to also be, in so doing, both giving it more kinetic impact, but also spin that it drains for the given spin downwards in the rotational circle plane of existence, blah, 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 inclination crap. A lot of words that just means it's a circle! It's spinning in a circle! It's heading back towards the fucking axle! It's so heavy. My fucking body. God, this is a steep hill. Fuck you, gravity. I don't normally take this way. But this is what this is, and that's exactly why gyroscope works, because there's a material, and it happens to have stretch constraints because of electrostatic forces for its electron orbits as they connect, and are very resistive to forces trying to rip them apart. Oh my gosh, heart's going. That's why heat tends to help them break apart. Because they vibrate really, really hard, and they add that given energy to the electron orbital field effect that's going on that resists its change of place and its given spin and trajectory for its curve it's taking. That's why certain geometric forces, which you wouldn't understand, but it's kind of like a dome with a circle at the dome in the middle where it happens to place most of its spread forces into the circle, making the entire dome take up the weight of the dome versus a single point at the top of the dome. That's why certain shapes that are not circles are so much more robust for spins than others. So a lot of them look a lot like stators, if you don't know. Circular dimples inside of a grooved pattern with other circular dimples that are inside of a sponge-like design that basically just keeps adding greater, holy shit, this is a steep hill, and greater degrees of support throughout the entire material itself. Fuck, this is a really fucking steep hill. Holy shit, I should have went the fucking easy way. It might be longer, but holy fuck, I'm gonna get there way shorter. Way longer in a shorter distance. Way longer. This is 4 to 8 times the energy than just doing that. God. Anyways. Good old stair-step master. Called a hill. A steep fucking sloped hill. Fucking stair steps, am I right, folks? Golly. Alright, now, let's sit on this rock and rest for a second. Holy Jesus. I'm about to pass out so much. I didn't even eat food. Oh, wait, no, did I eat food? I did. I had quesadillas with rosemary, garlic powder, onion powder, and mayonnaise. The good stuff without all the sugar in it. And it's good stuff. There you go. I'd suggest trying it before you say no. I was like, I'm just going to experiment. I'm going to be a shitty person in my heart. Static fucking charges be damned. Creating plaques on the surface areas of my arteries. You bastards. With your little claw-like grips from your fat molecules that are spiky. Collecting any sort of small hole or micro tear from stretching, straining in my arteries and capillaries and veins. You bitch. Anyways, that's basically why it works so darn well. That's also why my designs are a lot more flat and disc shaped with an axle inside of an axle. So with the radial axle flux, they can expand and contract into the axle. So I think it starts outside the axle and expands into the inside the axle like a gear change, but means that the outside forces and the levers are traveling slower, so I can spin it faster for the given torque that is there, which is just like any other gear change from a larger gear to a smaller gear. So there you go. That's all that really is and was. But that's why I use PCBs that are layered, ceramics, there's aluminums. There aren't really that much copper. If I'm being honest, I usually use conductive-based ceramic coppers or aluminums, depending on the given materials, design of necessary loads, tensile strengths, compressions that are necessary in the given areas going on with it. Which is why ceramics are such a big deal. They're both conductive and insulatory. When you put them in a bath that uses the electrostatic and electromagnetics around them with the right coils, and some discharging and some photo binding material, you can create extraordinarily precise layered ceramics with other regular elemental components such as aluminum and copper instead of compounds. Instead, and you can combine both of them to get a very novel effect in a metamaterial design that would make literally everyone else weep with how much better you are. God, alright, there you go. Jesus, fuck. So fucking tired. Holy shit. Alright. Bye.